Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this practical advice session on enabling home working with Microsoft Teams. It's obviously a little bit short notice, but it seems to have been quite popular. This is not a sales pitch. This is meant to be practical advice. There is one deck towards the end, which will tell us about solutions that we have that will help. But myself and my colleague Graham are ready to take your questions at the end. So if there is anything you hear as we go through, which you want to throw into the chat window, then please do, and we'll get through as many as we can, but we will answer all of them. Even if we run out of time, we will get in contact afterwards. So what we're going to go through today is common challenges being faced by organizations in response to this situation that we're now in. We're going to look at the options for deploying Teams rapidly. We're then going to take a little bit of time towards the latter part to talk about the positives of the situation. And then we're going to have an open discussion. Well, it's a webinar, but if you throw the questions in, we will discuss them and hopefully give you the answers you need. So the challenges that are being faced by organizations over the last few weeks boil down to a few key areas. The first one is that this is a really unprecedented test of working from home. The world has not seen anything like this whilst the technology has been available. And many organizations are enabling working from home very reluctantly. It's something they're being forced into. The key point to this is that no matter how we've ended up in this situation where people need to work from home, if we go into this with a reluctant approach, that's going to spin out some negative attitudes. And if we take negative approach into this as a solution, that will rub off onto the employees and will set things off on a slightly slippery start. So we want to make sure that we can spin this in a positive way as a benefit, as a we're coping, we're doing this, we're going to keep the business running. We've seen capacity issues around the performance of Teams and Skype for Business. If you have Skype for Business on premise, then we are seeing that it's potentially not necessarily the Skype for Business servers or the edge servers that are having the issues, but the connectivity to and from those solutions, and indeed things like port exhaustion. Microsoft Teams has had a load more resources thrown at it, and the performance seems to be very good. We're also seeing a lot of organizations sending users home with equipment that is not suitable or not of great performance, and that is creating a poor user experience. So laptop sales are in demand, headset sales are up through the roof, but we need to make sure that we give people the right sort of equipment for them to be able to function properly. And then we're seeing a massive test on connectivity of broadband services at home. The next part that we're seeing is how do we apply security and governance? If you've been planning Teams, then this might be an acceleration of it. If you haven't been planning Teams yet and it was further down the roadmap, then we'll talk about what we can turn on and how we can limit any damage, because we don't want to create a mess in the environment that will potentially have to be cleared up afterwards. And also we need to look at how we educate the users. We're not going to have time to do a complete adoption and change management solution, so we need to look at realistic ways of educating our users remotely. So the options we have are, the first one is to turn it on and hope for the best. Not ideal, I think, by anybody's measures, but large organizations and small organizations alike are doing it. The second is to apply the basics, apply what we need to be able to make sure that we don't cause ourselves problems. And then the third one is to do the best that we can, make the most out of the technology we have and how we look at driving uptake Option one, turn it on and hope. Will it work? Well, the short answer to that is yes, it will work. And it's been done by, as I said, a number of organizations. There are, however, many pitfalls to this. The first one being duplication and sprawl. If your users are allowed to create teams without any kind of governance around it, you may well find that you get duplication of teams where user A creates a team, user B creates a team, one creates it as A.B.C. And the other one creates it as ABC. So we want to make sure that we don't get teams which have the same purpose but with different populations and different members. We want to make sure that people are creating teams in the right way by not allowing them to create teams for random purposes. We want them to do it in a slightly more controlled way. If users find out that they're trying to put information into one team and it actually turns out to be in another team and the users are getting frustrated with it, the frustration will be taken out on teams and potentially working from home, and that is going to be a reputation that will be difficult to unpick once this is all over. The other thing is that you don't really have any real idea about what's going on within the environment. You don't know about your data. Is it secure? Who has access to it? What sort of machines are they accessing it on? We don't know what's going on. It's just complete free-for-all. And the main piece is that it's highly likely, as mentioned before, that when this finishes, you may well end up with quite a big tidy up operation. If we think about an organization that might have 1,500 or 2,000 users or something like that, it only takes people to create 2 or 3 teams over the next couple of months, and you've got a large number of teams and housework to do once this returns to normal. So yes, you can turn it on and hope for the best, but it's obviously not ideal and it's not really recommended. The second is to apply the basics. When we're looking at applying basics, we really need to remember a couple of things. The first one is, if we're doing things in a reactive and rapid manner, we want to document what we're changing. If we need to roll it back, we need to have a nice clear list of what it is we've changed and what we need to go back to. And the other thing is to remember that this is cloud that we're talking about. And the implication of it being cloud is when we're talking about user access, it could in theory be any user from any device from anywhere. The anywhere piece we don't necessarily want to restrict at the moment because people will need to work from where they can. The any user and any device we can do things about. So when we're talking about any user, we want to be able to prove that the user accessing the information is who they say they are. And there are tools within Office 365 that you can enable, such as multi-factor authentication, to say, yeah, okay, you've logged in with your credentials. I'm going to do a further check to prove that you are who you say you are. It's quite simplistic in its concept, but it's worth enabling. If we can take that one step further, then we can look at conditional access. This takes a bit more thought, but fundamentally says, do you know what? You're using an old PC and it's got no antivirus on it and it's not really up to date on all your apps. Therefore, we're not going to allow you to access it from this machine. So we can look at conditional access, we can look at multi-factor authentication. We can even take it one step further, which starts to get into the data section, which we'll come on to, and we can enable data loss prevention. So where we're looking at data that is already in your environment, we can enable this DLP service. You can classify the kind of data so that when you get into the realms of the data going into Teams, if it appears somewhere it's not meant to appear, then we can prevent it from being copied or screenshotted or forwarded or downloaded, etc. So access is a really important part. The next piece is the data itself. What data are you putting into Teams? Who's it going to be shared with? Are you allowing external guests in from outside your organization? Are these public teams? Are they private teams? What's the environment that data is going into? So we want to make sure that what we're putting into teams is either defined by policy and communicated to the users, or it's controlled with some sort of technology. It could be that you say to your users, don't put anything sensitive or anything confidential into Teams. We're going to do that via email or SharePoint or whatever it may be. So set your governance out nice and clearly for your users so they know what they can and can't do. Moving more onto the governance side, we want to look at who can actually create teams. By default, everybody has the ability to create teams. And we've talked about the sprawl and the duplication of names already. But when we're creating teams, we don't necessarily want to take away the flexibility of people being able to find their ways of working and create their collective working groups. But there's a balance between giving them a free for all and sending something to moderation so that somebody else creates the team for them. In most cases, having one or two people create the teams for an organization is not practical and not sensible. So we want to find that balance. So we can apply governance around what's the naming convention? Is it a duplication? And this again might be delivered by policy. You educate your users. If you create a team, you check to see if that team exists already, and you don't create it. If there's something similar, you go and join that team. So we need to make sure we communicate this really, really clearly so that people understand the boundaries that they are working in. And the duplication and sprawl, when you're creating a team, look for a team with a similar name. Yeah, we don't want to create multiple teams. But we also want to look at the team owner and membership. And the top one of this, the multiple owners, is actually quite relevant to where we are today. If I create a team and have me as the only owner, and I have 20 or 30 other people within that team, and I go off sick due to the virus, then that leaves people with limited access. Yes, they'll be able to operate and function normally, but if somebody else needs to be added to the team or whatever, then we're going to end up in a situation where we haven't got that person available. So make sure you have multiple owners. Again, that can be delivered either as a policy saying, if you're going to create a team, you have to create 2 owners or 3 owners, whatever it may be. And again, we're looking at the guest access. If you are looking at deploying this rapidly, maybe you take the decision to say this is going to be an internal comms tool only. We're not going to allow guest access at the moment. And maybe that's the way you protect your team's data. But whether that's done by, as I said, policy or whether it's technology, then it just needs to be communicated and as part of the strategy. So get the basics on the security and governance by addressing the access, addressing the data, and looking at who can create and manage the teams. You'll end up saving yourself a huge headache afterwards. When we get on to the best efforts, we're then starting to move into a situation where we've turned on teams. We've got some basic security and governance, so we know that our data is safe. It's not going to be 100% the right security and governance policy, but we know it's a reasonable level. So we can turn our attention to the user experience. We want them to like this. Now, as I said, you're not going to have time to do an adoption and change management program. But if you look at the principles of ProSci, the adoption and change management has a phase in it around the ADKAR process, which is on the right-hand side. You create awareness, you talk about the desire of the project, you look at the knowledge, how you train people, you get people to use it, and then you reinforce it. Now, you might not have time to do all of that, but you can certainly do a good chunk of it. The awareness piece, get somebody senior within the organization who has good standing to say, this is why we need to do this. This is really important that you embrace the product so that we can actually work together as an organization whilst we're in this current situation. Do it by a live event, do it by a video, do it by Yammer. It doesn't really matter too much how you do it. Use definitely multiple media streams because people read different things in different ways, but get that message out there. Create desire. This is, I think, in the situation we're now, best delivered over webinar series. But what we can do is we can look at the fact that we're rolling this tool out to people as a solution to the challenges we have. We still want to give them something that's going to make their life easier. So maybe we turn around to them and say, yeah, you can communicate through this. This is how you work. But actually, you can now drag and drop a file into a team. You can all collaborate on it together. You don't have to email documents backwards and forwards. Find some easy wins that are going to make people's lives better, and sell that through the webinar series. Get them on board. Get them to like the product and the things that it can help them with. Give them online training. If you have access to Teams, then you can use that to deliver your training. You can do one-to-many, and you can show people initially the very basics. This is how you send messages. This is how you share files in Teams. This is how you create meetings. We have the tools here. We need to use them to provide this online training. Doesn't need to be long, 2, 3, 4 hour sessions. It can be a half an hour blast. This is the basics you need to know. Record it, let them watch it again. We can then do subsequent online training seminars to say, yeah, okay, well, this is how you get the best out of a meeting. This is how you get the best out of your document sharing. This is how you get the best out of working with your flow or whatever it may be that you're wanting them to use. And lastly, provide easy access to support. If they get frustrated using the tool set, they're going to go and find another tool set to deliver the same solution. And that's where your shadow IT will creep in. So we want to make sure that this is nice, easy experience for them. So communicate with them, deliver those webinar series. The other thing we can do is use some tools, which we will come on to now, which will help reinforce that message. So these are off-the-shelf tools that we have. They need minor configuration and some workshop time just to have discussions with you. The first one, Create Team, addresses the naming convention. It addresses the duplication and sprawl. It applies your governance right from day one. Okay, you replace the natural way of creating teams with this application, and the governance that you agree gets built into it. And so anybody can create a team, but you know that it will meet your requirements. The second one, teamwork analytics and automation. This is where we start to scale the security and governance and the usage very rapidly. There's a lot of data in Office 365, and we can use it intelligently. So the security and governance, what happens if that naming convention, somebody changes it halfway through, halfway through March or April? We will pick up that it doesn't match the naming convention. We will then send an automated message back to the owner to say, you're out of compliance, change it. If there's 3 owners as your policy and one of them leaves or it leaves the team, then we can pick up on that. We can send an automated message to the owner again to say, you're in breach of compliance. We then basically build a situation where your internal IT teams are left to deal with persistent breaches or more complicated breaches. They're not getting dragged into repeated conversations about the same topics over and over and over again. So that allows us to scale out to tens of thousands once those policies are created. Same with adoption and change management. We want you to use messaging in Teams and meetings and share documents. We can see if people are doing that. And if they're only doing Teams meetings and sharing documents, then maybe we will trigger off an automated message to say, here's a reminder on how you use meetings. It's a 30-second video. Please watch it. So we can use the opportunity that we're being presented with to drive adoption and change management, as well as make sure the environment is secure. And lastly, we have the ability to provide your champions and your IT services with the support they need to be able to answer the questions on these tools which have been thrown at them potentially at the last minute. So we need to look at the positives as well. If we portray this particularly as I said at the beginning, as a negative picture and a solution, then we're not going to win the overall battle. The demand for work for home is increasing and will be accelerated rapidly by this. This will change the way organizations work and people operate. If people have the right tooling and the right level of education, they will use these tools to find efficient ways of communicating with people. These efficient ways of communicating and collaborating can then be brought back into the organization once all of this is done and dusted. And hopefully that won't be too long, but we can learn lessons from what's going to happen over the next few weeks, months. Encourage the use of video where possible. Teams lends itself really, really nicely to the use of video. So let's make the most of it. Video is coming as a default method of communication. We use it about 95% of the time within our organization. It's there. You get a better level of engagement with people. So let's encourage it. And lastly, this is a chance to reimagine how the business operates. So we need to take the positives again out from this and look at how it's going to change the business going forward. Opportunities like this, whilst they are a real pain to deal with at the moment, are the kind of things that change the way the future of business works. So don't just look at the situation where this is what we need to deal with. We need to look at what can we learn from it as well, because when you go back in and you still carry on using Teams, this won't go away. If people get used to using this for the next couple of months and you take this tool away when they go back into the workplace, you will have a big challenge on your hand. So as we've gone through this, I don't know if there's any questions. What have we got? Do we have any governance protocols that we can share with us? Okay, so before we jump onto that part, we are going to provide you with links to all of the components that we've talked about, which will help you get going if you're not sure where to look. These will be in the slide deck that will get circulated. I'm going to bring my colleague Graham in, which I think Graham needs to be unmuted. Around the governance and protocols, the main thing around the governance that we find is the life cycle of the tool, the making sure that we have the right owners, making sure that the naming convention is applied correctly. Those are going to be some of the biggest things. There are other areas that need to be addressed as we go forward through this, and that will be things like what happens to the life cycle of the team, how do we know when it needs to be archived or deleted, and that kind of thing. So we are able to identify that the team hasn't been used for maybe 6 months. Then there's a governance angle to say, right, at 6 months, we are going to prompt to get people to either keep the team, archive it, or delete it. So there's definitely protocols that we can, we can share around this.
Yeah, the good thing about Teams being a part of Office 365 is that you may have a lot of policies in place already around retention or DLP or things that Pete mentioned earlier. So rather than thinking that Teams is a standing start, what do you have already? Do you already use Office 365 groups, maybe with an Outlook, or do you use Office 365 SharePoint sites? So a lot of the questions may have been already answered. Just trying to take a moment to realize how they also apply to Teams.
Okay. We still struggle to work through Teams versus channels. Are there any documents that are good for that? Not on the links that we've put at the end of this slide deck, but we can certainly share information on that. One of the key things around the governance piece and the user education part is, when is it right to create a team versus creating a channel? we don't want to end up with huge unnecessary amounts of teams. The way we operate is that when we have a client engagement internally, we create a team that is for that particular customer, and then each channel is each engagement that we have for that particular customer. We don't want to create a customer ABC project 1 team and then a customer ABC project 2 team. So it really is a case of making sure that we just give them enough education to be able to understand when they create one versus another. We have another one, which is, can you schedule Teams meetings without audio conferencing enabled? By audio conferencing, I'm going to assume that you mean dial-in numbers, in which case, if you don't have an audio conferencing subscription, you can certainly do it without the numbers. It just means that everybody will be using the Teams clients or the web version of the Teams client to join. Is that fair, Graham?
Yep, spot on, that's correct.
Great. Can you use MS Teams successfully to host webinars like this one? So there is a, in Teams, there is a live event, which you can enable for certain users, and that will allow you to send or to host webinars up to about 10,000 people. So it definitely has the capacity. So yes, the answer is yes to that one.
Also worth pointing out that's included in the license as well, generally speaking.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's not going to cost you any more to do that. So that actually that reflects very nicely into the whole user education piece. If you have 10,000 users in your organization, you can do that. Obviously, that online training all in one go, it becomes very town hall and one-to-many. But you do have the ability to obviously scale up to very large numbers to do this. And that's not going to cost you anything. Okay, any more questions from anyone? Okay, cool. There's no more questions. This will be made available.
Just one final point to mention there. You spoke about the turn it on and hope as being an option. And I think at the moment now, if we are going to turn it on and hope people use this, you will see a short-term usage go up, just like we did at any point in the previous years as well. If you give someone a new tool, they will use it for a while. But the thing that keeps them there, the sort of the long-term purposes and use for teams, is to figure out how they're going to use it and why. And that goes back to a little bit of adoption change management, but really understanding how we can use teams, whether it's a departmental use case or cross-functional or project-based. Any of those things really helps people understand why they should be using Teams rather than just it's a new tool because they have to work from home.
Yeah, that's great. So we will send this slide deck out. I think the recording will be made available as well. But in the meantime, you know, as I said, this isn't designed to be a sales pitch. If you have questions and concerns and you want guidance as to how you can turn this stuff on, do get in touch. We want to make sure that businesses keep operating. And yeah, thank you very much for attending.